The experience is mediated through subjectivity precisely at the point where the subjective reaction is most intense. In Beethoven, many situations are scène à faire, perhaps even with the flaw of being staged. The entrance of the reprise in the Ninth Symphony, which is a result of the symphonic process, celebrates its original introduction. It resonates like an overwhelming, thus it is. The shudder is a response, colored by fear of the overwhelming. By its affirmation, the music at the same time speaks the truth about untruth. Non-judging, artworks point, as with their finger, to their content without its thereby becoming discursive. The spontaneous reaction of the recipient is mimesis of the immediacy of this gesture. In it, however, artworks are not exhausted. The position that this musical passage, once integrated, achieves by its gesture is subject to critique. It poses the question whether the power of being thus and not otherwise, at the epiphany of which such moments in art are aimed, is the index of its truth. Full comprehending experience, Erfahrung, which terminates in judgment of the non-judging work, demands a decision and, by extension, the concept. The lived experience, Erlebnis, is exclusively an element of such comprehending experience and faulty because it is subject to persuasion. Works such as the Ninth Symphony exercise a mesmerizing effect. The force they achieve through their structure becomes the force of their effect. In the development of music after Beethoven, the suggestive force of works, initially borrowed from society, has been shunted back to society and become agitative and ideological. Shudder, radically opposed to the conventional idea of experience, Erlebnis provides no particular satisfaction for the eye. It bears no similarity to desire. Rather, it is a memento of the liquidation of the eye, which, shaken, perceives its own limitedness and finitude. This experience, Erfahrung, is contrary to the weakening of the eye that the culture industry manipulates. For the culture industry, the idea of the shudder is idle nonsense. This is probably the innermost motivation for the de-aestheticization of art. To catch even the slightest glimpse beyond the prison that it itself is, the eye requires not distraction but rather the utmost tension. That preserves the shudder, an involuntary comportment, incidentally, from becoming regression. In his Aesthetic of the Sublime, Kant faithfully presented the power of the subject as the precondition of the sublime. True, the annihilation of the eye in the face of art is to be taken no more literally than as art. Because, however, what are called aesthetic experiences, Erlebnisse, are as such psychologically real, it would be impossible to understand them if they were simply part and parcel of the illusoriness of art. Experiences are not as if. The disappearance of the eye in the moment of the shudder is not real, but delirium, which has a similar aspect, is nevertheless incompatible with artistic experience. For a few moments, the eye becomes aware in real terms of the possibility of letting self-preservation fall away, though it does not actually succeed in realizing this possibility. It is not the aesthetic shudder that is semblance, but rather its attitude to objectivity. In its immediacy, the shudder feels the potential as if it were actual. The eye is seized by the unmetaphorical, semblance-shattering consciousness that it itself is not ultimate, but semblance. For the subject, this transforms art into what it is in itself, the historical voice of repressed nature, ultimately critical of the principle of the eye, that internal agent of repression. This subjective experience, Erfahrung, directed against the eye, is an element of the objective truth of art. Whoever experiences, erlebt, artworks, by referring them to himself, does not experience them. What passes for experience, Erlebnis, is a palmed-off cultural surrogate. Even of the surrogate, one's conceptions are simplifications. The products of the culture industry, more shallow and standardized than any of its fans can ever be, may simultaneously impede the identification that is their goal. The question as to what the culture industry inflicts on men and women is probably all too naive. Its effect is much more diffuse than the form of the question suggests. The empty time filled with emptiness does not even produce false consciousness, but is an exertion that leaves things just as they are.